7, 6, 5.
Good evening and welcome to this evening's Development Management Committee meeting. I am Joan Grime, Councillor for Culcheth, Glaisbury and Croft, and I will be chairing the meeting. Due to the current coronavirus pandemic, the Council have taken steps to follow restrictions and health guidance in relation to social distancing, whilst balancing the needs of carrying out our regulatory functions. This is the 5th meeting of this committee that is being held remotely. The agenda for the meeting will run as per the usual format. The meeting is being broadcast live to the public who have had the opportunity to make written representations which have been distributed to members. However, there will be no input from the public during the meeting. This is in line with the Coronavirus Act of 2020, Section 78. Present at the meeting are 8 elected Borough Councillors plus officers of Warrington Borough Council. I will now ask all those present to introduce themselves. Will councillors also confirm that they have received the agenda and reports on the applications and have a copy in front of them? An update report has also been circulated and available for members to view. So introductions, Councillor Barr.
Good evening, my name is Councillor Bob Barr and I represent Lim North and Thelwall, and I have all the papers in front of me and I've read the update report.
Thank you. Councillor Carey.
Good evening, Peter Kerr representing Fairfield and Howley. Confirm that I've received all the updates and I've read them all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Friend.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Graham Friend representing Poulton North. I've read or confirm I've read all the papers and I have them downloaded on the laptop in front of me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mundry.
Councillor Mundry from Latchford East. I confirmed I've read all the documents and updates and I have them in front of me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parish.
Yes, Chair. Hard copy of the agenda and the items and everything else on the mobile, ready to go.
Thank you. Councillor Wheeler.
Hello, I'm Councillor Wheeler representing Appleton, Stretton, Hatton and Higher Walton, and I've got the reports in front of me and I have read them.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Councillor Steve Wright, Busey Whitecross. I've got all the reports, I've read them, understood them.
Thank you. I'll also ask the officers to introduce themselves. Democratic Services.
Hello, I'm Jenny Cordell from Democratic Services.
Thank you. Legal Services.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Paul Clisby and I'm from the Council's Legal Services Department.
Thank you. Planning.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Nikki Gallagher. I'm the Development Manager.
Thank you. Transport.
Thanks, Chair. Mike Taylor, Transport Development Control.
Okay, thank you very much. So we go to agenda item 1, apologies. Have we any apologies, Jenny?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Tony McCarthy, Councillor Les Morgan and Councillor Brian Marr.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Members are reminded of their responsibility to declare any disclosable pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest which they have in any item of business on the agenda no later than when that item is reached. Councillor Barr.
Nothing to declare.
Councillor Carey.
Nothing to declare.
Councillor Friend.
Nothing to declare.
Councillor Mundry.
Nothing to declare.
Councillor Parish.
No, nothing to declare.
Councillor Wheeler.
Just a bit of advice, Chair. I do know one of the objectors who's objected to application number 1, the Louches Lane development. She knows I'm on this committee and she knows my position that I am neutral, so I'm not engaged in any dialogue about this application. And I certainly haven't said anything in an email that could be construed as being predetermined.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wright.
No declarations.
Okay. And I also have no disclosable interest in any item. So, Paul, can you confirm we've got no problems there?
Yes, Chair. So long as Councillor Wheeler is satisfied that that is not a particular friend and that she might be regarded as being unduly influenced, which is a matter for her to determine, then she's entitled to take part.
No, it is somebody who I have corresponded with occasionally about certain council matters. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We go on then to the minutes of the last meeting, which were circulated by email after the agenda. Has any member seen a problem with the minutes of the meeting on the 1st of July, which have been circulated to you? Any problems? Okay, I confirm that the minutes of the DMC meeting held on the 1st of July 2020 are a correct record. We go on to item 4 on the agenda, which is the planning applications. The first one is application number 2019-35516. It's from Premier Loushers Distillery House, Premier Business Park, Loushers Lane, Latchford, WA4 6DN. This is an outline application for the construction of up to 140 dwellings, use class C3, and associated works. All detailed matters are reserved for subsequent approval other than access off Loushers Lane. The application is recommended for approval subject to conditions and to an S106. Can I invite the Development Manager to present a report?
Thank you, Chair. The application relates to 7.5 hectares of land on Loushers Lane adjacent to Priestley College to the west and Blackburn Park to the east. Historically, the entire site has been within industrial use or as use as railway sidings. Currently, 2.5 hectares is occupied by hard-standing office or storage and is operational by Premier Tanker Services. The remaining 5 hectares of the development site comprises part of the Latchford Sidings local wildlife site, although this is largely not part of the developable area as shown on the parameters plan. The extent of the local wildlife site is shown within your agenda packs on page 38 and the parameters plan on page 42. 75% of the local wildlife site will be retained and enhanced. Occupying the central area of the Loushers Lane frontage is an industrial site known as Colas, which processes and operates bitumen products and which operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Slightly further afield there are established residential areas to the northeast and southeast, with newer residential estates to the south. The application seeks outline planning permission for up to 140 dwellings, with all matters reserved apart from access. Access is largely in a similar position as existing and would be shared for compatible uses of residential and the college and separated from that associated with the industrial use. The parameter plan identifies the maximum number of stories across the site and identifies an area of land to the northeast of the site to be safeguarded as a potential link towards the town centre. No build zone shown on the parameters plan take into account odour emissions from Colas, and further consideration would need to be given to designing out noise impacts at the reserved matter stage. The application is before Development Management Committee due to a call in by Councillor McLaughlin. She has written to state that although 140 houses, mainly on brownfield land, are welcome, she objects to the proposal due to odour, highway and pedestrian safety, scale, and the impacts on the local wildlife site in terms of loss and increased public accessibility. The application was publicised by 158 neighbour notification letters, press notice and a site notice. As a result, 4 objections were received raising issues of highway safety, safeguarding and security of residents and tree loss. Colas have also submitted representations which point towards the Council Strategic Housing Land Availability Assessment, in which the site was discounted in 2018 and 2012 based on issues of access, noise and odour, and states that residential use should not limit their operation. They consider that the residential use in close proximity would impose unacceptable constraints upon them. As members are aware, all plan applications should be determined in accordance with local development plan policies unless other material considerations indicate otherwise. The local plan policies against which the application should be assessed are contained within section 7 of your report for information. As is evident based on the short introduction that I have given to the development so far, there are numerous significant issues associated with it that require detailed consideration, informed by the context of housing delivery within Warrington. The primary issues associated with the development are principles, that is in terms of the development plan allocation, development within the local wildlife site, the provision of new homes, including affordable homes, highways matters, the impact on residential amenity, the impact on the adjacent business, Colas, the impact on ecology with specific reference to local wildlife site, the loss of trees and design. And I'll look at each of these issues. So the site is located within Inner Warrington as defined in the core strategy, and therefore sustainable development should be welcomed and approved without delay in accordance with the policy. Sustainable development includes the provision of for housing growth and affordable housing within sites accessible by public transport, walking and cycling. The majority of the site is brownfield in nature, with physical encroachment into the greenfield limited to 25% of that area. The development would not therefore hinder the council's objection of securing 80% of its housing target on brownfield sites. The designation of part of the site as a local wildlife site does not preclude development upon it. However, it is necessary to justify the need and mitigation. It is therefore important to recognise that there has been significant under-delivery of homes in the borough over the last 3 years, equal to a shortfall in delivery of 1,226 homes. Furthermore, Warrington is not currently able to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply as required by the NPPF, and therefore the relevant development plan policies are considered out of date, and applications meeting the criteria of sustainable development should be granted planning permission, with the exception of where any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the framework as a whole. This is assessed within the planning balance section of your report in paragraphs 9.89 to 9.91. The fact that the site was excluded from the SHLA does not mean that it cannot be considered for housing development. The SHLA forms the basis on which the council measures itself against the 5-year housing land supply, and should the site be identified as developable, it will contribute towards that target. The reasons for its exclusion from the SHLA and the application responses to them are detailed within the report. Furthermore, the council's local housing need assessment demonstrates shortfalls in the deliverability of affordable housing. The table in paragraph 9.20 of your report demonstrates that this has been a trend over the last 5 years. 30% of the proposed units will be for affordable, resulting in up to 42 units of affordable accommodation, which would be secured by means of Section 106 agreement. This would accord with the development plan and will fulfil a recognised borough need. In the consideration of the application, significant weight has been given to the sustainability of the site in terms of location and connectivity, the delivery of much needed housing and the securing of affordable housing in line with planning policy. Notwithstanding this, as stated earlier, this is a complex site and there are other significant issues that require detailed consideration. The proposed access to the site is via improvements to the existing junction serving Priestley College, as shown on the parameters plan at the end of your report. These arrangements separate potential conflicts of the residential and college uses from industrial access at Colas. The application has been assessed to facilitate good pedestrian links into the site, and pavement widths will be improved in this location as a result to support such movements. Adequate visibility will be provided for vehicles, and whilst recognition is given to the current traffic issues on Loushers Lane, consideration is given to the removal of HEVs relating to the current site, and it's considered that the traffic generated by up to 440 dwellings in this location would not have significant detrimental impacts on the highway network. A pedestrian cycle link will be provided to Blackbird Park, and land will be maintained for a future link road, should it come forward, which is an aspiration for the Southern Gateway. Although this road does not form part of the application and is therefore not for consideration at this time. On this basis, consider the application would not result in an adverse impact on pedestrian vehicle safety and is acceptable in terms of its highway impacts. In terms of potential impacts on residential amenity, there are very few neighbours directly abutting the site, just 3 in number. The proposal is capable of being implemented whilst respecting suitable levels of privacy and amenity in accordance with planning policy and guidance of both existing and future residents. These details will be considered at the reserved matters stage. Consideration has been given to the continued operation of Colas, which borders the application site on all sides. The NPPF is very clear that new development should integrate effectively with new businesses, and existing businesses should not have unreasonable restrictions placed on them as a result of development permitted after they were established. The restrictions that the residential properties may place on the business operations have been raised in representations by Colas. The primary issues associated with the relationship are odour and noise. Due to the nature of odour and the way in which it travels, it has been possible to identify no build zones on the parameters plan to mitigate the impacts of smell on the amenity of future occupiers. This has been assessed by the Council's Environmental Protection Service and is considered to be acceptable in fulfilling its objectives. Due to the details to be considered at this time, comprising access only, conditions will be applied to any planning permission to ensure residential properties were suitably protected from the noise from Colas and adjacent highway and the college. These are listed as conditions 25 to 27 in the report and requires the submission of additional acoustic reports in addition to mitigation for consideration at reserved matters stage. Potential mitigation options are detailed within 9.44 of your report. The ability of Colas to maintain their business operations has been afforded significant weight in the decision-making process. On the basis of the information submitted and adherence to the proposed conditions, it is considered that the site is capable of being developed for residential use for up to 140 units. The application would encroach within 25% of the LWS. In itself, this does not preclude development. This is not precluded for by development plan policies, although it is necessary to examine the specific issues associated with this. As a result of the proposal, there will be a loss of woodland, which has been largely unmaintained for a significant period, and whilst the remaining LWS will be enhanced through management and habitat creation secured by condition, it is recognised that this would not mitigate entirely for the impacts of the development. As such, £84,000 has been secured for further off-site mitigation at Paddington Meadows, a local nature reserve as well as local wildlife site. Some 1.8, which is just over a mile. 1.8 kilometres, which is just over a mile away from the application site. This contribution will provide for woodland management and planting of new trees and woodlands, whilst additional maintenance could be employed within the meadow areas, including eradication of invasive species. There are no sites closer to the development that will provide the level of opportunity that exists at Paddington Meadows for enhancements, and the £84,000 would in effect result in a net gain in ecological terms. The application was accompanied by ecological surveys, and these have been assessed by the Greater Manchester Ecology Unit, who have no objections subject to conditions, including a resurvey of bats prior to the submission of any and each reserved matter application. The development proposes the loss of 40 trees, of which 75% are either low quality or unsuitable for retention due to health. The most significant loss are those to the site frontage, which are high value by means of the contribution to the street scene. The Council's tree officer has objected to this loss only. Whilst there would be approximately 124 new trees planted, in addition to new hedgerow and additional woodland planting, which will all be beneficial to the further greening of the area, the London Plains at the front of the development cannot be directly mitigated against in terms of scale and location. Whilst the applicant has indicated the provision of a landscaped site entrance, the details associated with this will come through reserved matters application and will be secured through the landscaping condition. None of the trees on the site, including those in the site frontage, are subject to a TPO. In addition to the commuted zone for ecological mitigation, a further £108,000 would be secured towards a new primary care facility at Wilderspool Medical Centre, and the upkeep of open space and play areas on the site would also be secured through a Section 106 agreement. The application was accompanied by viability assessments that demonstrated the contributions sought for off-site playing pitches and educational were not viable at this stage. A review mechanism will be placed into the Section 106 agreement to allow this to be reviewed at 90% of open market sales and the contributions claimed in part or full should there be any uplift in viability at that time. In conclusion, it is considered that significant weight has been given to the housing need that can be, and that the majority of the impacts, save for the removal of London Plains and the site frontage, can be mitigated against, and that where this is not demonstrated through the application, there is confidence that this will be achievable at reserved matter stage and by means of condition. The loss of the London Plains would not demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the proposal in terms of the delivery of much needed housing. The application complies with national and local planning policy and is therefore recommended for approval subject to conditions and a Section 106 agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I can confirm that we have received written representations from Ms M Wood with an objection and Mr E Kelly in support. I'll now ask members of the committee to confirm that they have read and understood those representations. Councillor Barr?
Read and understood.
Councillor Carey?
Yes, Chair, I confirm.
Councillor Friend?
Yes, Chair, confirm.
Councillor Mundry?
Yes, Chair, I confirm.
Councillor Parish,
Yes, Chair, I so confirm.
Councillor Wheeler,
Yes, Chair, read and understood.
Councillor Wright,
Confirm.
right, and so have I read and understood these. I confirm also these representations will be included in the minutes of this meeting. I will now invite comments and questions from members to the officers in turn, starting with Councillor Mundry.
No comments, Chair.
At this point, okay. Councillor Parish, have you got any comments or questions for officers?
It's just on the question of the co-less are obviously objecting, really about what would happen if future residents did complain about noise or odour. I thought it might be useful just to get a bit of legal guidance on that. If I may give the example, there was a British Waterways back in the day gave permission for half a boatyard to be sold and apartments put on the site, nice waterfront apartments. And when they were built, the residents of the apartments then complained about the noise from the boatyard. So it's just on the legal thing of the principle that, you know, if you create a nuisance, you're still liable, even if the person complaining has actually come and started living next to the nuisance. So I did just wonder how robust this would be against future complaints if we did give consent.
Thank you. Have legal services any comments to make, Paul?
Yes, I can confirm it is correct that if there were to be a complaint of nuisance, it would be investigated in the ordinary way, and a nuisance could be found. There is an element of the nature of the area. Clearly, this is if this is granted permission, then it will be a mixed area of residential and industrial use, and the standards may differ from a purely residential area or a purely industrial area. So that would be taken into account. I mean, obviously, what I would say is your technical officers have assessed the prospect of nuisance being caused to the new occupiers, and obviously you have their advice. They consider that the living conditions of those occupiers can be safeguarded by way of conditions which they've suggested. I'd say conditions and limitations, and obviously that's their technical advice.
Thank you, Chair. It was from that, the fact that there's houses not that far away in the school, I'm not quite sure whether there have been a lot of complaints anyway. So it's just, you know, what weight we give to this, if any.
Well, Chair, obviously my advice would be that you should give that it is a material consideration, the living conditions of the future occupiers. So you should give it. You should certainly give it your attention. But clearly, my advice is that you have your technical officers' advice. They've assessed the situation, and you have their advice, which is that they believe that their advice is that it can be dealt with by conditions.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Could you clarify? Is that the no build zone that would be the condition?
In part, there are conditions in relation to odour and conditions in relation to smell as well. So yes, it is partly. It's partly about the no build zone. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments or questions from Councillor Wheeler?
Yes, Chair. I've actually got 3 questions. Am I allowed 3 questions?
Yes, go on.
Two quick ones, one slightly longer one. Which are the 3 properties which are directly affected by the development?
Nikki, have you got an answer to that?
So I think that's probably best illustrated on the parameters plan on page 42 of the printed agenda. And over to the west, immediately abutting the site, there are 3 semi-detached properties.
Right, I'm not sure where they are. Sorry. Is that the roads off Wilderspool Causeway? Is it one of the First World War Avenue roads?
That's right. That's
yeah,
right.
Okay. That's fine. Thank you. Right. The second question. Where are the London? Oh, actually got 4 questions. Where are the London plane trees that are going to be affected?
So the London plane trees are right at the entrance at the moment to the college.
Right.
So they are the mature and they're a significant height.
Yeah. Okay,
so where we're talking there about mitigation, it wouldn't be possible to provide on a like-for-like basis in that location, but it would be possible to provide some landscaping enhancements to the entrance to that site.
Okay. There is no section. I've got 4 questions. This is my 3rd short one. Is there no contribution to sustainable travel? No section 106 money.
No, there wasn't. In this particular instance, it wasn't considered that that was necessary in this location.
Right, okay. And now my 4th question, it relates to the access point. I went to Priestley today only because I was led to believe there was a St Rocco's drop-off charity point, which there wasn't. But I went onto the Priestley site and I came out again, and as I exited onto Loush's Lane, immediately to the left of me was a very big colas lorry wanting to come out, going in the same direction towards Wilderspool Causeway. There was no indication of who should have right of way there. He wasn't taking any prisoners and I let him go. He was immediately followed by a big haulage lorry. So I do have concerns about this, even though it's a separate access for the school and the new development. It is very, very close to the existing colas site and they are very big lorries. And given that colas are not particularly happy about this proposed development, I just wondered how that is going to be managed, that access point. Thank you.
So I think probably Mike would be best placed to respond to this, but just as an overview, the colas access wouldn't be impacted by this. They should be able to, as part of the conditions, enable to facilitate their business as they currently do. And it would just be the new access that will be amended. And I think Mike would be best placed to add a little bit more meat on the bones of that one.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, yes, Councillor. I mean, it's one of the key difficulties with this site. The Premier Tankers site, on which the development's based, has an access point that's shared with colas. If you look at the aerial image on page 39, it's not the clearest photograph, but you can, in the bottom left corner of that photograph, you can see the access to Priestley College, and then the finger access that points towards colas. That's the actual Premier Tankers access site, and the colas access comes immediately off that to the east. The initial proposals from the transport consultant was to utilise Premier Tankers' existing access points, because obviously there is that right of access, but that brought it into more conflict with the colas access in such a way that we weren't even able to get a footway on one of the sides because of the colas access point. So the revised access arrangements are shared with Priestley College. So the immediate benefit of that is it splits residential and the college use away from the industrial access at colas. Now, the direct answer to your question is that both access points, if this scheme goes ahead, the Priestley College and the residential site will form a priority give-way junction at Lucia's Lane. So they should be given way to traffic that's already travelling along Lucia's Lane. And similarly, the colas access, the existing access, is a give-way junction. So they should be given way to traffic that's already on Lucia's Lane. Now, when a vehicle leaves the colas site, effectively, as soon as they enter Lucia's Lane, anyone at Priestley College should be given way to them if they're approaching from the left, but vice versa. If someone turns left out of Priestley College, someone from the colas site has to give way to those because they're on Lucia's Lane. The difficulty is that the existing arrangements are totally substandard. We've got, two junctions that are so close together.
Can I just come back on that, Chair? I mean, that is just awful, absolutely awful. Sorry, really not happy with that at all. It's just a botched compromise as far as I'm concerned.
Chair, if are we allowed to come in, Chair? Steve Parish.
Let's.
I mean,
yeah, okay, Steve. All right, you come in.
Yeah,
now.
I mean the existing access is problematical because it has just been said there's 3 separate accesses. This reduces it to 2, and as far as I can see, it's one outlet for HGVs out of Colas. The other outlet is now there's no HGVs coming out of this site that we're talking about. They're all going to be mixing with the traffic coming out of the school. So it seems to me to be an improvement.
Okay, do you want to come back on that, Judith?
No, not for the minute, Chair, thank you.
Okay, right. Councillor Wright, have you got any comments or questions for officers?
Yes, please. Again, it's about the access and egress onto Loushers Lane. I very often cycle along Loushers Lane, and that part of the road where they sort of merge becomes very narrow as you go over the Black Bear Bridge, and it's a very sort of at the moment it's quite a dangerous road to cycle along. I can't see this improving it. What provision has been made? I know you said there's a cycle path through towards Black Bear Park. What provisions being made for cyclists? I mean, just thinking about the way things are now with the world, and we're saying cycling is now an important part of travel. I think the priority of cycling should be given, perhaps raised on when we do these sort of things. So how is it going to be safer for cyclists to travel along Loushers Lane when all this is done?
Right. Mike, can you answer that?
Sure, Chair. Thanks, Chair. I mean, you're right, Councillor. I mean, Loushers Lane, we're restricted by the existing constraints of Loushers Lane, the width of that and the layout of that, and as it goes over the bridge. And like you say, it's in terms of the level of traffic and HGV movements along there, it's not ideal for cycling. That's why one of the key things as part of the development, we were keen to ensure that there's a direct link to Black Bear Park, which is a more cycle friendly environment, if you like. In terms of cycle access from the development, there's obviously that option to use the Black Bear Park link, but again, the cycle access will be via a residential stroke educational establishment road, which is wider than the existing road, and it is more appropriate for general traffic to move through anyway. In terms of providing facilities on Loushers Lane, we've not sought any because of the constraints that we already have on Loushers Lane.
Right, thank you, Mike.
Another one? Yep.
Have we got any
question?
Comment?
Yeah.
Sorry, have we got any comment or question from Councillor Barr?
Councillor Graham, I'm not.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. I thought you said you were okay.
No,
go
no,
on, Steve.
I've heard the answer to that one. The other question was about the Section 106 agreement putting money into Paddington Meadows, I believe.
Yes.
Because there's no other sites nearer. I mean, the Twigger is nearer, and that's not too far from there. That could do with some funding. So I'm not sure why. And also the area that's actually being developed, I think, is best placed to have improvements, isn't it? That's where closest to where the people are going to be benefit most. We're going to they're going to suffer from the development. Perhaps the benefit should be nearer to them. That's my point. I'm not. What I'm saying is, I don't think the only option is Paddington Meadows, and have other options been really looked at nearer to the site?
Okay, Nikki, can you answer that one?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There are a couple of issues there. There are, in terms of on-site mitigation, there are some on-site mitigation that are proposed. Now, the LWS at the moment hasn't been subject for any maintenance for quite some time. So the quality of that LWS is questionable in those terms because of its lack of maintenance, and it will be maintained as part of this application, and there will be enhancements to that area as part of this application. But given that the development encroaches over 25% of the LWS, it is considered that that wouldn't be sufficient to mitigate the impacts. Now, the £84,000 that's been identified would demonstrate a net gain in ecological mitigation, so there's a betterment here that's going to be achieved. And when we've looked for alternative sites where that money could be used, we've taken into account factors such as longevity of those sites. So the Pennington Meadows that has been identified, that is also a local wildlife site, but it's also a local nature reserve. So that's the additional status that offers, gives it better protection from future development. So there's the strength within that designation. There's also the fact that there's community groups on site there. There's programmes that are already in place that, in effect, this 84,000 can piggyback on and enhance for the benefit of the ecological systems that are in place there. Now it's 1.8 kilometres away, which, as we just mentioned earlier, is just over 1.1 miles, just over 1.1 miles as the crow flies. So in terms of the ecological impact, it's relatively close for species. There are places closer, as Councillor Wright just pointed out there are areas closer, but none of them would be able to get the added value that it is considered that Paddington Meadows would be able to bring. And that's why it's been given quite significant thought, and that is why Paddington Meadows is being suggested.
Thank you, Nikki. Is that okay now, Councillor? Right.
I've heard what's been said, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Barr, have you got any comments or questions for the officers?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do. First, I'd like an explanation about the parameters plan. I think I'm reading the report correctly, but the curved areas around Colas, to the northeast of Colas, and then at the end of the Colas site close to the road access, are those the areas which are modelled as potentially having odour which is too serious to build houses on?
So, Councillor, the element with the stripy element, if you like, on the parameters plan, that is the no build zone due to odour. Yes.
And that's a modelled. I mean, what's strange is those boundaries are a complete nightmare for anyone trying to put houses around them, and those are conjectural boundaries because they're simply based on the modelling of the odour levels. We don't know what the actual odour levels are likely to be once the development's gone through.
This site has been, there's unlikely to be any particular change in the level of odours on the site. Right. The site's been operational as it is for quite some time, and therefore there's consistency in the level of odour that's produced from the site. So we can have some certainty around those no build zones due to odour.
So you're confident there's no build zones. One thing which I note, because I remember well the planning application to the houses immediately to the south, on the Potteries named estate, Colas came up with exactly the same objection at the time when that development was put in, and objected strongly. Do we know whether there's been any history of complaints or conflict between the householders immediately to the south of the Colas site and Colas?
Not that I'm aware of, Councillor Barr. I would have expected the Environmental Protection Officer to raise that within their consultation response, as they would do usually in such instances, and no such reports were provided.
Right. So, I've taken Mike's view, and I must say that I do share Councillor Wheeler's concern about the access to the site. What we seem to be doing is providing outline planning permission for a completely botched housing development because it's being shoehorned around an industrial development which is no longer appropriate for that part of Warrington. Now, I'm advised that the council has no intentions of compulsory purchase, and that may not be successful if the council tried to do that. But my feeling is that this scheme is being shoehorned around a development that ought not to be there, and certainly we would not be seeing the scheme in its current form if Colas were prepared to move their business somewhere else. Now, I appreciate that we have to take a decision on the basis of what's before us tonight, but what I'm seeing before us tonight is a severely compromised scheme, both in terms of transport access and in terms of the location of the houses on the scheme. So if one said transport, constraints on the site and underuse of the site because of the presence of colas, would those be valid reasons for refusal of this outline planning permission?
I mean, as you're aware, Councillor, if I can, Chair, the application needs to be considered as it is at the moment, as it is presented, and therefore the materiality of those issues would need to be explored. Now, the NPBF is very clear that new developments should not impact upon the ability for existing businesses to go about their operations. And also what we've got here is a scheme which responds to the constraints that are put forward, that the existing business in that location puts forward, without putting pressure on them to cease their operations. But whilst bearing in mind the drivers for this development in terms of policy, which are the provision of homes within Warrington, given our 5-year housing land supply and our failure to deliver our housing targets.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you for those questions. Councillor Carey, have you got any comments or questions for officers?
Yes, Chair. I think the principle of development of this site is okay as far as I'm concerned, but I don't agree with putting residential development right next to an industrial site, which has already got stated problems with regard to noise and odour. We've had problems like this in my ward, and when the new residents take up occupation, they don't accept it. They don't accept that the prior existence of the industrial unit next door should be allowed. It's got to be contained by regulations, and you can guess that there's going to be years of conflict between the two sides of this argument. So I don't accept that this thing can be contained. Colas themselves are saying it's not going to be easy to restrict noise and odour, and to put housing so close to me it's a recipe for disaster for the future. And I think the ward councillors in that area are just going to get endless problems, as are the officers at environmental health, because people just won't accept it in this day and age that somebody can emit odours or noise to the detriment of the wider population. I accept that when this was built, it was probably under different circumstances than we have now, but the fact is that people expect much higher standards now than they did in the past. And as I say, I know from experience in Fairfield and Howley that it takes a lot of effort to get a result that satisfies people. And at the end of the day, many people will never be satisfied because they don't want things like this next to where they live.
Thank you. Have you any comments to make, Nikki?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would just comment that the amenity of the residents, of local residents, has been a particular concern of ours, and that is something that we've looked at into a lot of detail. And you mentioned there about the complaints there have been, the potential complaints that would be made, and the officers that assess these applications are the officers that are in receipt of those complaints and have done on alternative sites, so they're well aware of the issues that can be raised in relation to this. They've assessed particularly those the odour surveys that have been submitted and the no build zone, and they are comfortable that providing that development is outside of the no build zone, which would be conditional in the application and is part and parcel of the outline permission, that wouldn't generate the complaints, justifiable complaints. Now, obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean that it wouldn't generate complaints, because people have different levels of sensitivity. But what we're talking about here is justifiable complaints. And the same goes with noise. So we've had a look at the noise information that's been submitted to date, but we know that at reserve matter stage, a lot more information will need to be forthcoming, so that we can ensure that developments can be suitably mitigated. We don't have that level of detail at the moment within the application. That will come at a later stage within the reserve matters, and the potential options for mitigation are detailed within the report, as I directed earlier. Subject to those to adherence to those conditions, there would be no reason why amenity would be significantly impacted for new residents within that area, and that COLAs couldn't continue to operate as they currently do.
Chair, can I just add to that?
Thank you, Nikki. Sorry, who?
That was
Paul.
Paul.
Yes,
sorry.
please do.
Yes, just to add to the point that that the level of that this is assessed against is against impact to amenity, which, as you'll appreciate, is a much higher standard in relation to the occupiers than nuisance. So your officers are saying not only will this not cause a nuisance, it will certainly, they're saying it certainly won't cause a nuisance, but in fact it won't be significantly impacting on amenity, which is obviously a higher standard again. And as Nikki has said, these are the officers who deal with nuisance complaints all the time, and in my experience, they are very careful to make sure that they don't create future problems for themselves.
Chair,
Yes.
can I follow that up, please?
Yes.
What I find slightly contrary about this is that COLAS themselves are saying we cause a sufficiently serious nuisance and would have sufficiently serious impact on amenity that we do not think you should build houses around us. Now, NPPF is telling us that if an existing industrial use says that their work would be constrained if you were to grant a planning permission, that we shouldn't grant planning permission. So we've got a really peculiar sort of roundabout case here. Now, I don't have a lot of sympathy for COLAS. I'd like to see COLAS off this site. But I think if COLAS themselves say that they're not confident that our modelling and our assessment of amenity and nuisance is correct, and that they fear that they will then get complaints from new residents, as Councillor Carey has quite rightly pointed out, then I don't know how much we should weight we should be applying to that, because we're being asked by the officers not to apply any weight to the COLAS objection, because it's all been mitigated by putting the houses around these peculiar circles and arcs away from COLAS to avoid odour, and by coming up with a really quite peculiar, and as Mike says himself, not entirely satisfactory access mechanism for the site. All of that would disappear if COLAS disappeared. We can't make COLAS disappear, so it flips it round that we probably should be paying more attention to COLAS's objection, because that's what NPPF tells us to do.
Can I just come back on that again, Chair?
Certainly.
Sorry, yeah. Perfectly understandable. Of course, if we were to refuse, or if you were to refuse this on the basis of significant impact to amenity, the onus on an appeal would obviously be on the local planning authority to demonstrate that there is that significant impact. No doubt we would seek COLAS's assistance in doing that, but obviously your technical professional officers are saying that is not the case.
If I could just add to that as well, Chair. I wasn't here. I wasn't part of the discussions at the time. But one of the councillors there mentioned that COLAS has previously objected to development to the south of the site as well.
That's correct.
In the past, and ultimately then that argument hasn't been carried forward. That was ultimately granted and has been constructed. But I wasn't part of those discussions, so I couldn't clarify whether that was the case or not.
There's quite if you excuse me, Chair, I'm simply trying to put both sides of the argument so that we can consider this fully. I'm not expressing a view in either direction at the moment. I come into these meetings with an open mind, and my mind is open at the moment.
Chair, if I can I just add something further?
Yes, certainly.
I think it's also just important to identify that we are in agreement, and the report is in agreement with what Councillor Barr has said there in terms of the NPPF and what it says about about COLAS being able to continue to operate as it does currently, and that has been fully assessed in detail by technical officers. Thank you.
Thank you. At last we come to Councillor Friend. Have you got any comments or questions you want to make to officers, Councillor Friend?
Not at the moment, Chair, thank you.
Okay. Well, we've had quite a lot of discussion. I think it's worthwhile going round again to see if people want to build on comments or questions that others have raised. Councillor Mundry, have you any further comments or questions?
No, no further comments.
Okay. Councillor Parish?
No, Chair, it's obviously a very awkward site with the constraints it's got. Not least if we do want to take over the old railway. I'm not sure about a road. I'd have thought it was down for a rapid transit system rather than a new road across the sidings. But however awkward the no-build zone is, there's got to be some open space as part of the development. So I'm presuming that will be used as part of the open space anyway. So yeah, I'm reasonably content with it, even if it is awkward.
Okay. Councillor Wheeler?
Thank you, Chair. I just come back to the highways access again. Obviously, because I live in South Warrington, you see these colas lorries a lot. They are big, long, cylindrical tanker lorries. They are big, they are long, they are slow, and they're everywhere all the time because they operate a 24/7 service. So the thought of having an access of me turning out of Priestley College left, a colas lorry is turning out right, without any proper controlled access, and who has right of way is just a recipe for disaster.
Thank you. Any further comments from Councillor Wright?
Yeah, Colas UK. I think the thing about Colas UK at the moment is it's been there a long time, but it's almost like it's not there. You don't know it's there. It's hidden away behind the trees and bushes on Loush's Lane. It's not obvious. It doesn't. Nobody's really bothered by it in many ways because of that reason. But this will open it up, won't it? This will mean I wouldn't like to live near to it. I'm not sure anybody would really, but so I've got concerns about that, and I still have concerns about the highway thing. But yeah, this is what I've really got to say.
Any further comments from Councillor Barr?
Yes, reluctantly, I am swayed by Nicky's arguments and by the officer's arguments. In an ideal world, I would want to vote against this development, but I fear that we do not have the grounds to vote against it. But instead, what we're going to do is we're going to give outline planning permission for what will be a botched development next to an inappropriate land use, and that seriously concerns me. But no one has yet come up with anything that I think would be watertight at appeal as a reason for refusal, which bothers me. Yes, building additional houses and the mix of houses and using this site for houses, all of that is extremely important. But that colas versus housing thing is a real problem to me. But I haven't found any grounds for turning it down.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carey, do you want to make a further point?
I still can't come to terms, Chair, with placing residential units so close to a 24/7 industrial operation. To me, it's a recipe for disaster.
Okay, Councillor Friend.
Nothing at the moment, Chair. Thank you.
Right. Anybody want to make any further points among the members of the committee?
Chair Steve Parish. I take the point about this. I don't know whether we just got a bit nesh about living accommodation and working accommodation being close to each other. Obviously, the people who work at Colas aren't necessarily going to live nearby, but notwithstanding what I said before, I just wonder if we've got just a bit nesh about whether these uses can exist together. Yeah, on the whole, bearing in mind that we're certainly getting rid of one of the industrial uses on the site. and it's a big area of land which is available for housing, and we've not got a plan which gives us 5 years housing supply. So I think I agree with Councillor Barr that it would be hard to sustain an objection at appeal.
Right, very strong points. Anybody else in the committee wish to make any comments? Are any further points of clarification required from officers? Do officers wish to make any further comments?
No, thank you, Chair.
No, thanks, Chair.
Right, thank you. Councillor Carey, do you wish to make a proposal?
No, Chair, I intend to abstain.
Right. Okay, then I will propose the motion that the application is approved. Is anyone prepared to second that motion? I'll go through and ask. Councillor Barr?
No, I'm not prepared to second the motion.
Okay, Councillor Friend?
Yes, I'll second the motion, Chair.
Okay. Right, so the motion is proposed and seconded. Are there any amendments to the motion? No, right. Can I hand over to Democratic Services then to take the vote?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Barr?
Abstain.
Councillor Carey?
Abstain.
Councillor Friend?
For.
Councillor Grime?
For.
Councillor Mundry?
For.
Councillor Parish?
For.
Councillor Wheeler?
Refuse.
And Councillor Wright? Councillor Wright?
For.
For. Thank you. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 5 votes in favour, 2 abstentions and 1 refusal. Therefore, the application is approved.
Thank you. Right. Going on to application 2020 36579. Former Foxwood Special School, Chatwood Drive, Birchwood, WA3 6QW. This is full planning, a major application. It's the proposed construction of 69 dwellings for private rent and private affordable rent, 32 two-storey houses and 37 apartments in 2 blocks, with car parking, landscaping and associated works. The application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions and to either a S106 or an alternative legal agreement, which is a procedural reason because the council is the landowner. Can I invite the development manager to present a report?
Thank you, Chair. So the application site was previously occupied by a small school for approximately 80 pupils with special educational needs. The site has been largely cleared and there is vegetation around the periphery, both inside and outside of the site. The wider residential area is characterised by various house types and styles largely associated with the development of the new town area. The application proposes 69 dwellings comprising 32 2- and 3-bedroom houses and 37 one-bedroom apartments. 30% of the total number of properties will be available for affordable rent. The scheme as a whole is a build-to-rent scheme. The application proposes 2-storey houses set back from Chatfield Drive in order to maintain the majority of the existing vegetation buffer, with 3-storey apartment buildings towards the rear of the site. Car parking would be demarked adjacent to the highway, which is not uncommon within the surrounding area. The application is before members because the applicant, Incrementum, is the council's housing company and the council own the site. Birchwood Town Council commented in the application, making specific reference to the issues associated with the site and the wider area for consideration. The application was publicised by 77 neighbour notification letters, a site notice and a press notice, and 3 representations were received as a result. These are detailed within section 4 of the report and in brief include impacts on light, privacy, overlooking, loss of trees and impacts on ecology. As members are aware, all planning applications should be determined in accordance with local development plan policies unless other material considerations indicate otherwise. The local plan policies against which the application should be assessed are contained within section 7 of your report for information. The primary issues associated with the developments are the principal, highways, design and layout, trees and ecology, residential amenity. And I'll look at each of these. Although the application site is unallocated within the core strategy, it is identified within the SLAR and is considered development to be achievable and suitably located. As previously referenced in detail this evening, Warrington has been able to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and there has been an under-delivery of much needed homes and specifically affordable housing within the recent past. The development of Foxwood will clearly assist in meeting the housing needs of the population, and in accordance with the NPPF, this needs to be given significant weight. The extent of buildings and hard standing that previously occupied the site is evident in the aerial photograph in section 12 of the report. There are areas of the site that have previously been occupied by plain pitches which have lapsed, and the majority of the remainder of the wider area was previously developed land. It is considered, therefore, that development would not hinder the council's objection of securing 80% of its housing target on brownfield sites. For the reasons set out here and in further detail in your report, it is considered that the application is acceptable in principle. The application has been considered by colleagues within the transportation section who have had particular regard to its sustainable location for public transport, bike and foot, and connectivity to the railway station, Birchwood Centre and the town centre within the context of the previous use. Within the context of the previous use of the site and the ability to manage car parking by the council's housing management company. The levels of car parking meet with the council's parking standards for new development, SPD, and electrical charge points will be facilitated. On this basis, it is considered that there would be no significant detrimental impact on highway safety as a result of the development. The proposal has been designed to respect the character of the surrounding area from public vantage points insofar as possible by respecting the 2-storey scale along Chatfield Drive, and prominent landscaping features which are outside of the boundary on Chatfield Drive would be retained and protected for the duration of the build. Trees would also be provided within development, which would complement the landscaping theme within the wider residential area. The 3-storey apartment blocks will be located to the rear of the site, separated from Ordnance Avenue and bungalows on Talbot Close by a deciduous tree belt. Glimpse views will be possible, particularly in the winter months, but the structures are far enough away from the boundary so as not to dominate. Information was submitted with the application to allow ecological matters to be fully assessed by the Greater Manchester Ecology Unit, who have not objected to the proposal, subject to an informative, as set out in paragraph 9.69 of your report. In terms of residential amenity, particular consideration has been given to the relationship of the 3-storey apartments to the bungalows on Talbot Close, which are 1 metre below the site ground level. At the closest point, the proposed development is 25 metres away. This is considered sufficient in accordance with policy guidance on the basis of separation distance between habitable room windows of the bungalows and the elevation of the proposed apartments, which will contain obscurely glazed windows, which are secured by condition 22, and is therefore assessed as though it is a gable. Consideration has also been given to overshadowing, particularly to the east-facing gardens on Talbot Close, and it concluded that there would be some loss of early morning sun as a result of the development, but notwithstanding this, BREEAM standards are complied with. There will be no detrimental impacts on habitable rooms. The existing trees adjacent but outside of the shared boundary are in the ownership of your housing association and would be retained and protected for the duration of the build. Consideration has been given to the amenity of future residents, and in particular nationally described space standards, which looks at internal habitable space provision. This document is not planning policy, but is often used to and referred to as a measure of amenity. In this instance, the properties are not significantly short of the standards, and during the course of the application, the matter has been raised with the applicant with a view of establishing whether betterment can be achieved. This would result in a reduction in the number of units and fewer affordable properties, with a cost in excess of £1 million to be achievable, and is therefore not viable. Consideration has been given to the impacts of the proposal on amenity, therefore, and the need to deliver housing and affordable housing in particular within the borough, and the status of the document. On balance, and given the marginal marginal nature of the discrepancy, on balance it is considered that the benefits would significantly outweigh the impacts of the smaller housing units within a quality development with sufficient external amenity space. It should be noted that the scheme fulfils all of the requested Section 106 contributions, which will be provided towards healthcare and sports facilities, and furthermore the application proposes a communal energy scheme which has environmental benefits. In conclusion, it's considered that the application meets with the policies contained within the core strategy. It would meet a proportion of identified housing need within the borough and will be acceptable in terms of its impact, subject to conditions and Section 106 or similar legal agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I can confirm that we received a written representation from Mr. J. Smith on behalf of the applicant. I will now ask members of the committee to confirm that they have read and understood this representation, taking account, of course, that Mr. Smith wrote in report in support of the applicant for both item 2 and item 3, because they are the same applicant in fact. So asking if to confirm that you've read and understood. Councillor Barr.
Confirm.
Councillor Carey.
Confirm.
Councillor Friend.
Confirm.
Councillor Mundry.
Confirm.
Councillor Parish.
Confirm.
Councillor Wheeler.
Confirm.
Councillor Wright.
Confirm.
And so have I. And I confirm also these representations will be included in the minutes of this meeting. I will now invite comments and questions from members to the officers in turn. Councillor Parish, have you got any comments or questions?
Not at this stage, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Wheeler.
Not at this stage, Chair, no, thank you.
Councillor Wright.
Not at this stage.
Councillor Barr.
A couple of questions. First, the impact on Talbot Close. That row of mature trees stays, so the access to light on Talbot Close is already constrained, at least in the summer, by the density of the foliage on the trees to their east. Is that correct?
That would be correct, Councillor Barr, yes.
So the loss of light that you referred to in your report is simply due to the height of the apartments? That's right. Yes, so it has been assessed as the apartments rather than the trees. Yeah, and not the houses. No, it's the apartment block. Okay, that's one question. The other general concern I have about the design and the tenure mix on the proposed development, I'm not sure whether these are material planning issues. I think they ought to be material planning issues, but certainly our local plan tries to attempt to get a mixture of tenures and prices on developments. Here we're going for affordable rent, which in Warrington is pretty low, or private rent, which also tends to be pretty low. My fear is that by having effectively a single form of tenure, low-cost rented accommodation and small units, that we might be creating a problem for ourselves for the future, that these might, if they become less popular, become the sink estates of the future, which we wouldn't have got if we got a better housing mix. Now, obviously, we have to assess the application that's before us, but can I ask Nikki whether housing mix is something that's discussed with applicants at the time an applications come forward? It is discussed with applicants at the time the application comes forward, and at a pre-application stage as well, and there is a reference to that within your report. In a nutshell, this is entirely a build for rent scheme, so it's a type of product built to rent which has grown in popularity nationally within the last few years. So at the time of the core strategy being written, it wasn't a popular concept, but is now widely accepted nationally as being a means to deliver housing. Now, for that reason, because it wasn't a widespread product at the time of writing the core strategy, there is no reference to that within the core strategy policy. But MPPF, which has come out and updated subsequent to the adoption of the core strategy, does make specific reference to build for rent schemes and the percentage of those type of schemes which should be affordable. And in that regard, this scheme meets with those requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Have we got any comments or questions from Councillor Carey?
No, Chair.
From Councillor Friend?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Can I bring up a point myself then? I understand that the parking is quite limited compared with the usual standards. Can Mike Taylor comment on that, please?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, it's certainly not a traditional layout as such. I mean, obviously, the majority of schemes we see have in-curtilage parking, and our standards recommend the numbers associated with that. But members will be aware that our parking standards also have Appendix D, which allows for more flexibility in the parking provision and caters for sort of schemes like this where the concept is more design-led rather than traditional housing, and it allows for unallocated parking spaces. Now, the number of parking spaces within the plot meet the requirements of Appendix D, so therefore it does meet our requirements in terms of parking numbers. One thing that I would add for information is obviously we have an emerging policy and emerging requirements for electric vehicle charging points, and the fact that spaces are provided on street sort of limits the ability of individual residents to create charging points. But we've made sure that the layout and the proposed management plan, which is covered by condition, will allow at least every dwelling to have an allocated space, whereby if they then want to introduce an electric charging point, that can be catered for.
Right, thank you. Are there any further comments from councillors to any of the officers' questions to the officers, sorry, or comments?
Just a quick question to Mike Taylor. There was some concern about the access to the estate. So, am I right in thinking that there are just two accesses, both off Chatfield Drive?
That's right, Councillor. The original proposal, when it came in, had one single point of access, but we felt there were some access issues with the row of houses that run parallel to Chatfield Drive. So there's effectively a service road being created there, so that forms a secondary point of access.
And how have you modelled the volume of traffic and movements that are likely to be generated on Chatfield Drive by this development? Is that going to cause any problems?
We don't foresee, Councillor. I mean, the road network around there is appropriate for the level of traffic generated. We have a trigger that requires a transport assessment where, you know, a more detailed capacity led assessment will be carried out, and that is 80 dwellings, and so this falls slightly short of that. But we're also conscious of the fact that the nature of the development, the level of traffic generated by this type of development, which is like, as Nikki says, is a build for rent scheme. Traffic levels and parking provision are influenced by a number of factors. One of them is the tenure of the properties and the fact that the site itself is a brownfield site. So at some point, it's, you know, there's been a traffic generation on that site anyway. So we've got no issues.
Thank you, Mike. It's very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you. Any further comments from committee members? Do officers wish to make any points of clarification?
No, thank you, Chair.
Well, thanks, Chair.
Right, then I propose the motion that the application is approved. Councillor Mundry, would you like to second that?
Yes, I second that, Chair.
Right, thank you. So the motion is proposed and seconded. That is for approval subject to conditions and to either a S106 or an alternative legal agreement. Can I, are there any amendments to the motion? Okay, can I hand over to Democratic Services then?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Barr?
4.
Councillor Carey?
4.
Councillor Friend?
4.
Councillor Grime?
4.
Councillor Mundry?
4.
Councillor Parish?
4.
Councillor Wheeler?
Aye. 4.
Thank you. Councillor Wright?
4.
Thank you. That application is approved.
Thank you. We go on to application number 2020-36798. Former Sycamore Lane Primary School, Sycamore Lane, Great Sankey, WA5 1LA. This is a full planning application, major, for the proposed construction of 92 dwellings for private rent and private affordable rent, comprising 47 two-storey houses and 45 apartments, car parking, landscaping and associated works. The application is recommended for approval subject to conditions and to an S106 or an alternative legal agreement, because the council is the landowner and it's a council company that's put it forward. Can I invite the development manager to present a report?
Thank you, Chair. So the application site is located within an established residential area and was previously occupied by a primary school which closed in 2013 and was largely demolished in 2017. There is significant tree coverage across the site and in particular along the boundaries of Sycamore Lane, Sankey Way and Birdwell Drive. The development proposes 45 apartments of 2 and 4 storeys and 47 two-storey dwelling houses. 30% of all housing across the site would be affordable. The majority of the primary tree belts would be retained, although there will be some thinning and maintenance. A representation has been received from Andy Carter MP, who has expressed concerns on behalf of his constituents, in particular on the issues of traffic impacts. Councillor Amanda King has also objected to the proposal, and this is detailed within your update note. The application was publicised by 137 neighbour notification letters, site notice and press notice. As a result, at the time of writing the report, 35 objections have been received as detailed within section 4 of your report, and briefly these include the principles of development, highway safety with particular reference to current issues within the vicinity, amenity, character, social infrastructure and ecology. Members will also note that there is a reference within the update reports to a petition that has been submitted. This is dated January 2020 and predates the submission of the application. The details of that are in terms of the development as a whole, subjections to the development as a whole, non-specified. So as members are aware, all planning applications must be determined in accordance with local development plan policies unless other material considerations indicate otherwise. The local plan policies against which the application should be assessed are contained within section 7 of your report for information. The primary issues associated with the development are the principal, highways matters, design and layout, amenity and ecology, and I'll look at each of these issues. The site isn't allocated in the core strategy, however it is within an area that is largely defined by its residential nature. As referenced in relation to the previous 2 reports this evening and as set out in detail within the committee report, Warrington is currently unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and therefore in accordance with the NPPF, sustainable development should be granted planning permission, with the exception of where any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies of the framework taken as a whole. Furthermore, there has been a significant under-provision in affordable housing within recent years, and this build-to-rent application will provide 21 affordable homes to rent, which should be secured by Section 106 agreements or similar legal agreements. Significant weight should be given to meeting the borough's housing need in considering this application in accordance with the NPPF. Particular consideration has been given to highways issues within the wider area and the potential for the exacerbation of these here through the proposed development. The site is within a suitable location for pedestrian connections and linkages to public transport. The main vehicle access to the site will be from Sycamore Lane, with a further secondary access for pedestrians and cyclists, also onto Sycamore Lane. The application was accompanied by a transport assessment that has been reviewed in detail by Highways colleagues, and it has concluded that there would be no material impact on the road network as a result. Levels of parking have been considered in the context of the ability to manage parking by the council's housing management company. In any case, the levels of car parking meet with the council's parking standards for new housing for new development SPD, and electrical charge points will be facilitated. On this basis, it is considered there would be no significant detrimental impacts on highway safety as a result of the development. Representations have been made requesting that alternative accesses are considered, for example, directly onto Sankey Way. Whilst members are aware that the recommendations can be based only on the scheme under consideration, it is the case that any new access or egress onto Sankey Way would have significant implications for traffic flow and safety. The application as presented accords with planning policy, and there are no highways objections to the development. As previously stated, the tree belt along Sycamore Lane will be largely retained, and this would remain the dominant feature within the street scene, with properties set well back and further separated from the existing highway by residential gardens, parking or associated infrastructure. The majority of the site will be 2-storey, with the exception of apartment block 1, which will be 3-storey. The mix of apartments and short runs of terraces combined with varying road widths and surfacing materials would create visual interest, variety and local distinctiveness, while it would be ensured that materials would be reflective of the wider area. Green space is incorporated within the site. It is considered that the result will be a quality development that responds to its surrounding and accords with planning policy. The impact on the amenity of the existing local residents has been fully addressed, and the council's interface distances are complied with. Consideration has also been given to the proximity and orientation of car parking in relation to existing properties, and in all instances these are offset from the boundary with a vegetation buffer, and close boarded fence would be in situ and would not therefore result in significant harm to the neighbouring properties. A condition requiring the submission of a construction management plan is suggested to protect residents for the duration of the build. In terms of the amenity of future residents, separation distances are also largely met with the exception of plots adjacent to number 74, which would have a distance of just under 9 metres as opposed to 13 metres usually recommended. In this instance, consideration has been given to outlook from these properties. The interface does not extend the entire width of the properties, and they would still retain an open aspect. Consideration has been given to the amenity of future residents, in particular nationally described space standards, which looks at internal habitable space provision. As discussed previously, this is not a planning policy document, but is often used and referred to as a measure of amenity. In this instance, the properties are not significantly short of standards, and during the course of the application, the matter has been raised with the applicant with a view of establishing whether betterment can be achieved. This would result in a reduction in the number of units and a fewer affordable properties with a cost in excess of £1 million, and it would therefore not be viable. Consideration has been given to the impacts of this on amenity, the need to deliver housing and affordable housing in particular within the borough, and the status of the document. On balance, to consider that benefits would significantly outweigh the marginal impacts of the smaller housing units within a quality development with sufficient external open space, amenity space. Similar to the previous application, consideration has been given to nationally described The application is accompanied by a Phase 1 habitat survey and has been reviewed by Greater Manchester Ecology Unit. The development largely occurs within low-value former playing fields and hard-standing previously occupied by the buildings. The majority of the trees will be retained. GMEU do not raise any objections subject to conditions. It should be noted that the scheme fulfils all the requested contributions, which will be provided for enhanced healthcare, education and sports facilities as detailed within paragraph 9.75 of your report. This includes contributions towards enhanced pitches, a chapel for primary school to compensate for those on site which have not been used since 2016 in accordance with Sport England's policies. In conclusion, it's considered that the application meets with the policies contained within the core strategy. It would meet a proportion of identified housing need within the borough and will be acceptable in terms of its impact subject to conditions and a section 106 or similar legal agreement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I can confirm that we've received written representations from Mr. Gibson, Dr. M. Turner, Mr. S. Foy against the application, and Mr. J. Smith, who wrote in support of both the increment and applications. And there's others that I'll mention later. But first, can I ask members of the committee to confirm that they have read and understood those 4 representations? First, Councillor Barr.
Confirm.
Councillor Carey.
Confirm.
Councillor Friend.
Confirm.
Councillor Mundry.
Confirm.
Councillor Parish.
Confirmed.
Councillor Wheeler. Councillor Wheeler.
Sorry, confirm.
Right, thank you. Councillor Wright.
Confirm.
And so have I. And I confirm these representations will be included in the minutes of the meeting. I will also mention, as you know, there is also a petition signed by over 200 people in January this year against the development of the site in general. And you've also had updates from Councillor Amanda King and others today. I will now invite comments and questions from members to officers in turn, starting with Councillor Wheeler. It's your turn.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions. One of the objections was came from 61, 63 and 65. I think it was at Sycamore Lane, about the ability to turn because of the development opposite. I'm not sure it was Sycamore Lane now. I'm just trying to find my notes. Could Mike clarify that?
Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, it was Sycamore Lane, Councillor. I mean, obviously those properties will be directly opposite the new access point, which, I mean, on residential estate roads, there's nothing unusual in that. I think the reference was made that they had difficulty emerging from their driveways and carrying out the turning manoeuvre to head off in the direction that they want. To put that into context, the width of Sycamore Lane there is 7.3 metres wide with a 2 metre footway. So from them leaving their driveway, there's 9.3 metres to carry out that manoeuvre, and that's more than adequate. I mean, typically a car park layout or like a shopping car park, there's a 6 metre aisle width for a vehicle to pull out and turn. So we're confident there's no issue in respect to the road width, and standard residential roads are usually 5.5 metres wide.
Thank you. I do have another highways question. With regard to the layout of the site, do I take it that parking is front onto the property and that there are no garages?
That's correct, Councillor. It's obviously the same developer as the previous site, and the same principles in terms of the approach to the parking has been taken, in the fact that it's not your standard within curtilage residential parking layout. It's design led, and it's parking within the street scene, if you like.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Any comments or questions to officer from Councillor Wright?
Just comments. Some of the residents, I think Amanda King as well, access onto the A57, that's not considered appropriate, or is that not something that could be looked at?
There's been quite some discussion about this from the MP as well. Yeah, if Mike would like to comment.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's not something we would consider. I mean, the A57 Sankey Way, as members will know, it's a dual carriageway, it's high-speed route. Its primary function is movement from one large area population to another. Any access point impacts on that. And so for us to agree an access point, it would have to have some strategic value and provide some relief elsewhere. For the number of properties we're talking about, it wouldn't be considered. And there would be design issues as well with creating a new access point so close to the roundabout, and because of the nature of the route itself. So it's not something we would ask for. It's not something we would consider appropriate.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Any comments or questions from Councillor Barr?
Yes, as with the previous development, I am concerned that Nikki puts a nice gloss on it, but these are slightly below our minimum size standard. These are for affordable rent and for private rent, which will be low cost. It's effectively a mono tenure development, which is aimed at people who are in need of affordable housing. And I really do question the wisdom of having mono tenure estates of that sort. The question I would have is, will right to buy apply to any of these properties, and would right to buy or could right to buy be removed in conditions, or would it be necessary to do so?
I believe it's already been done. Am I right there, Nikki?
Shall I answer that question?
Okay, of course.
Well, the right to buy obviously only applies to properties which are and right to acquire to properties which are owned by a local authority, or a registered provider. And in the event that there is such an owner, then it can't be excluded.
And in this case, would there be such an owner?
I'm trying to recall whether the proposal does involve transferring the affordable housing to a registered proprietor or not.
But if we don't, it'll belong to the council.
No, it will.
The council's housing development company.
No, that's not an issue. It's the housing company is a completely separate entity and isn't affected by those rules. And of course, it isn't necessarily the case that they would be the developer. They may pass it on to another developer.
Is that the case even if the council is 100% owner of the housing company?
Yes.
Right, that strikes me as being a neat dodge. A neat dodge. However,
Councillor Barr, I think I can assist there. Sorry, if I can just.
That would be very helpful, Nikki.
It's the intention that all of the development will stay with incrementum, so that's affordable and other. So it'll all be built for rent, but within the council, within incrementum's ownership.
Right, which I think also explains why we have a petition with 200 people against it. We have had this elsewhere. There was a notorious case about 10 or 15 years ago on Chester Road, south of the Ship Canal, where residents successfully blocked a development like this through a common land application. Now, the reason for that is it's because we're imposing a tenure mix and a housing type mix onto a local community that they don't want. Now, that's not a planning reason for us to object to this, and we have to have more affordable housing in the town. But I am really concerned that we should be putting forward applications of what could, in bad circumstances, become the sink estates of the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments from officers on Councillor Barr's points?
There's a couple of things actually that I'd like to pick up on. There was a procedural issue, which is the matter that was just referred to, which is the petition. And so that petition was received on the 2nd of July, so very recently, within the last week. And there was 203 names on that petition, but it does predate the submission of the application. It demonstrates public feeling within the area that were granted, but it's just important to bear in mind that it actually predates the application that has been submitted, and we are aware that there has been changes in the application since that was submitted. That said, the petition seems to object to the developments as a principle rather than any of those specifics which have then been subject to change. So that was one thing, and then the other thing was just about it becoming a sink estate of the future. I think we just need to be wary here about the consideration that we give with these build to rent schemes, and obviously, like any area, with the correct management and the development of communities within these areas, there would be no reason why that would be the case.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from Councillor Carey?
Not at this stage, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Friend.
Not at this stage, Chair.
Councillor Mundry.
Not at this time, Chair.
Right. Councillor Parish.
No, Chair.
Right. Well, we've had a few comments. Do any of those people wish to comment again?
No, thank you, Chair.
No other questions from councillors? Do officers want to make any further points of clarification?
No, thank you, Chair.
No, thanks, Chair.
I propose the motion that the application is approved. Councillor Parish, are you prepared to second that motion?
I am, Chair, yes.
Thank you. So the motion that the application is approved subject to conditions and to a S106 or an alternative legal agreement is proposed and seconded. Are there any amendments? Okay, can I hand over to... Sorry.
Just before we do, sorry, it's a bit belated, but we're just going back to, just for clarity, Nikki, in what she said, I think said there was money for primary school places at Chapelford, but 975 says Great Sankey Primary. Just wanted to check that. It was on my list, but I forgot.
Seems important.
I may have misheard you. I thought you said Chapelford, but it was
I did say Chapelford. You
that relates, Chair, to the sports. Some of the sports provision is at Chapelford primary school.
Primary school place. Okay, so primary school places at Great Sankey, but sports at Chapelford.
That's right. It's in paragraph 9.75 of the report.
Thank you for that clarification. Thanks, Chair.
All right, thank you. I don't think I need to repeat the proposal. I think that's clear. Can I hand over to Democratic Services to take the vote that the application's approved?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Barr?
4.
Councillor Carey?
4.
Councillor Friend?
4.
Councillor Grime?
4.
Councillor Mundry?
4.
Councillor Parish?
4.
Councillor Wheeler?
4.
And Councillor Wright?
4.
Thank you. That application is approved.
Thank you very much. We come to the final agenda item, the appeal decisions summary. The report on appeal decisions is attached to your agenda, starting on page 3. There are no decisions reported, but there's a notice of one new appeal against a delegated decision. Does the development manager wish to make any additional comments?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Are there any questions from members? Councillor Barr?
No questions, thank you.
Councillor Carey?
No questions, Chair.
Councillor Friend?
No questions, Chair.
Councillor Morgan?
Not here.
Sorry, Councillor Mundry?
No questions, Chair.
Councillor Parish?
No questions.
Councillor Wheeler?
No, Chair.
Councillor Wright?
No, Chair.
Are there any further points of clarification from officers?
No, thank you, Chair.
I propose the appeal summary report is accepted. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wright?
Second, Chair.
Right, thank you. Can I hand over to Democratic Services?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Barr?
4.
Councillor Carey?
4.
Councillor Friend?
4.
Councillor Grime?
4.
Councillor Mundry?
4.
Councillor Parish?
4.
Councillor Wheeler?
4.
And Councillor Wright?
4.
Thank you. The report is noted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I can close the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance and all your hard work.
Thank you, Chair. We're beginning to get quite good at this.
Unfortunately.